Well, welcome to our workshop with the title Using the Hands-on Utrecht Roadmap for Scholarship of Teaching and Learning to Guide a SOTL project. And in short, we have called this roadmap the ISSOTL. My name is Lindy Wijsman. I work as an educational consultant at Utrecht University in the Netherlands. And I'm here together with Femke and with Irma. And they can introduce themselves shortly. Irma, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Emma. I'm associate professor at the Department of Pharmaceutical Sciences, but I'm also a senior fellow at the Center for Academic Teaching of Utrecht University.
And I'm Femke Kirchner. I, just like Lindy and Irma, work at Utrecht University as an educational consultant. And yeah, that's it.
Yeah, thank you. So in this workshop, we're here to tell you all about our ISSOTL roadmap, which is a very hands-on tool to guide a SOTL project. And before we start with this, we would like to know a little bit more about your backgrounds of everyone who's here. So we have some questions for you to start with to activate you right away. I would like to ask you to raise your hand if the question counts for you. So our first question, who has teaching experience? Please raise your digital hand. Oh, I see everyone raising their hand. So everyone has teaching experience. Great. So our second question, who has experience in designing education? Please raise your hand again. Okay, I see 4 hands raised. Great, thank you. A third question, who helps teachers to innovate their teaching? Yeah, I think everyone helps teachers to innovate their teaching. Great. Sometimes we have different audiences where no one helps teachers to innovate their teaching. So this really helps us in framing our workshop a little bit better. And a last question, who does this, helping teachers innovate? Who does this research informed, for example, by using literature? Yeah. Also, many of you do this research informed. Okay, thank you very much. And I think maybe the last question there was no need to ask this question at the ISSOTL conference because I assume that we use a lot of research to inform our teaching. So to go on to the goals of this workshop. What we will do is to give an introduction of a tool to help your SOTL project succeed. And this tool is called the ISSOTL. So after this workshop, you know a little bit more about this tool. We will show its unique feature, which is the CMO Logic. And you will have some hands-on practice with the analysis of teaching activities. And this is actually one of the steps of our tool. So what we will do is we present an overview of our roadmap, and then we go into detail on the first 2 steps of this roadmap. And we will have a lot of interaction possibilities. So please really ask your questions, raise your hand, type in the chat, however way you would like to interact with us. Please feel free. Okay, to go on to our tool. Starting a SOTL project. Starting this kind of project all begins with wanting to optimize, solve, or understand something in your teaching and education. So, for example, you may feel a certain mission, or you experience a frustration or an insecurity in your teaching, or maybe a teacher you are helping in the project may feel frustration or an insecurity. You may have an interest in some kind of topic in your teaching or education, or you may experience a problem. Well, in short, there must be a reason to start a SOTL project, because if not, then why would you change something, and what is there to win by starting a SOTL project? So we're going to start thinking about this for ourselves a little bit, about this reason. And yeah, I have a question for all of you. So think of a teaching situation in which you or someone you were helping wants or wanted to optimize something or understand something better or solve a problem. And maybe it's possible to think of a very specific teaching situation where one of these, like optimizing or understanding something or solving things, were an issue. And maybe you can write down the situation that you're thinking about in the chat so that we can all see this situation that you were thinking about. And I'll be silent for a little bit to give you some time to think about this question. Yeah, so I see a chat message from Andy, implementing service learning experiences in my geography courses. Yeah. Carol, how to maximize interaction in the use of a new active learning classroom. Great questions. Okay, I'll give you a couple more seconds. I see a message from Marianne. How to document teaching to advance student learning. Yeah. Well, thank you for these thoughts of a situation where you want to optimize something or understand something better or solve a problem. And at first, these questions in the chat may look quite different from each other, but they may have things in common. And I would like Femke to ask Femke to go to the next slide. Because these reasons or these motivations we have to start a SOTL project or to start research something in our teaching or education, we might categorize the questions in one of these three types of reasons or motivations we have. We might look for a solution to a problem that we would like to test. We might be interested to gain insight into students' learning process, or we might be interested in understanding the effects of a new learning activity or an innovation. So we experience in guiding teachers in a SOTL project that their questions are almost always able to be categorized in one of these three aspects: finding a solution, gaining insight, or looking for an effect. And categorizing the questions or the motivations really helps to focus a SOTL project. So we use this to bring some focus to a project. And it may be interesting to think about your teaching situation and see for yourself whether you are looking for a solution or insight or an effect. To shortly give you an example of a solution-based question can, for example, be, what can I do to stimulate my students to come to class prepared? You're looking for a solution for a problem of prepared students. For gaining insight, examples maybe, and Femke may click. You may be interested in the question, why are my students not preparing themselves for class? Then you want to gain insight into what's happening here, what's going on. And if you're looking for an effect, examples may be, like here on the slide, what happens to student motivation when I use peer feedback to grade student papers? Then you already have a learning activity or an innovation that you want to try, and you want to know what effects does this have. So I went over these examples quite quickly because I think that you're all familiar with questions or motivations for SOTL projects like this. But categorizing these really helps in focusing the question you will come up with for your project. Oh, and now I see Femke has left our meeting, I think.
No,
And
no, I'm back.
Ah, yeah. Femke has also left.
Femke's left.
Oh.
Yeah, yeah. It
Oh,
happened
no.
to me as well.
Yeah. Well, we still went
It
on
just
to
kicked
the
me
next.
out. It kicked me out, so I had to come back.
Yeah. Well, that's fine. I'll just continue because we did go to the next slide. Because after, well, this first start with our SOTL project and our motivation to start a project, we will go to an overview of the instrument we developed. And the roadmap, the SOTL, is based in the 5 fundamental principles of SOTL. So it's grounded in context, it's focused on student learning, it's methodologically sound, preferably with students as partners, and appropriately public. These are the principles underlying our roadmap. And then we can continue to our next slide. I don't know if that's possible.
Did Femke had the control?
Yeah, Femke has the control.
Did she, okay, did she have the control?
So I'll try to share my screen.
Do you want to share your screen? Yeah.
It will take me a while. Maybe. Let's see.
Because the next slide is very interesting because that's an overview of the roadmap that we came up with. So it's the roadmap at a glance. I can tell you something about it already because it's based on the, well, the research cycle. And we came up with
Can you see it?
No, I still see Femke's screen.
But
it does look like you're sharing the screen now, Emma. But I'm not sure you are. I mean, the sharing screen icon is next to your name, but
yeah.
what I can see on the screen is still the slides that
Femke.
that your colleague left. Yeah, yeah.
Well, maybe it's best to just continue and to ask everyone to open the PowerPoint that we attached.
Yeah.
For yourself, and then I'll tell you at which slide we are.
Of course. So if everyone scrolls down, you will see downloadable content, and you can download the PowerPoint and then follow the presentation that way.
Yeah, I think that's best for now, and then we'll see when Femke gets back, if Femke gets back. So we're at slide 11 at this moment. And in this slide, you see that we've came up with a model, cyclical model, from the research process containing a lot of steps, and that we found out that, well, if we look at SOTL documents, if in SOTL guides, that we find out that there was an important step missing in the guidance we found. And especially for teachers who just started the first SOTL project, they missed some information to come from their teaching practice and a description of the context and their motivation to start a project to a researchable teaching question.
Sorry, Emma, I think you're sharing the screen now.
Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
it's working. It's working now.
We are here. Yeah.
So, well, we found that an important step is missing, and that's why we started formulating this roadmap with several steps and added an extra feature to this, which makes it a special feature of this roadmap. And then you can go to the next slide here now. And this special feature is the CMO Logic. So we have added step 2 to the research cycle of SOTL. And step 2 is the CMO Logic, which is an educational design model. And this model says simply, like, in a certain context, the teaching context, a certain intervention will set certain mechanisms to work, leading to certain outcomes. So this design model really relates the context, the interventions you do in this context, the mechanisms that get to work based on these interventions, to the outcomes. And it's really interrelated. And we've worked this out in step 2. And well, in total, the roadmap contains 8 steps, guiding a teacher through this SOTL process. And this is the overview of the model, that the complete roadmap consists of 6 pages with information, with tips, with tricks, and with questions, really helping in guiding a SOTL project. And what it does, what it really helps teachers to do, is to zoom in and to zoom out of their projects. So it helps to zoom in at a particular step and really look in detail at for example, the teaching activities in step 2, and take a real focused look, making decisions, finding a question. But it also helps to zoom out and take an overview look on your project and see if all the aspects of your project are still aligned. That's one of the important characteristics the roadmap does. So zooming in and zooming out is important. And what we just did in the beginning, when I asked everyone for a teaching situation, is that we made a start with step 1 of the roadmap. We were looking for the reason to start a SOTL project, which was a problem, a desire to gain insight, or to find an effect. And it was related to a certain context. And in the roadmap, we describe the context in a little bit more detail and also help the teacher to find important aspects of the context to describe in order to make the project as focused as possible on this certain context. So this for step 1, and now we will go into step 2, and I see that Femke has come back into the meeting, which is great because she will guide us into this step 2 of the roadmap, which is the unique feature of our roadmap.
Yes, I hope I won't be kicked out again. The whole platform seemed to freeze on me. So I hope it will last for 15 minutes, because that's how long I'll be talking about step 2, and I can talk about step 2, I think, for 2 hours. So for my feeling, I have to go rush through this, but I think it's good to know that if you have any questions, if things aren't clear, if you want more in detail information, then you can always contact us. I don't know if you already showed the booklet. If so, then this is the second time, but the roadmap is not only this round thing, but it's a whole, it's a very detailed described booklet we have. And so at any time we can send you this booklet, or well, talk to you through Teams or whatever. So okay, let me start, because this is all takes away from the explaining of step 2. Step 2 is the analysis of the teaching activities, and as Lindy already told you, it consists of 3 very important aspects: the learning intervention, the learning mechanism, and the learning outcomes. And in this step, what we'll be doing is, on the one hand, think about these important aspects of your project, because they're all in your project, because you're in a teaching environment, a teaching context. So we're going to be thinking about these, we're going to relate them to each other, and we're going to make conscious choices. Because educational contexts are very complicated and consist of many, many, many aspects. And this is often a problem in SOTL projects, that you have to make choices. Otherwise, your project is too big and you have no idea what to choose, or you want to do everything. So be choosing, and not only from your gut feeling, but because you shouldn't rule out your gut feeling, but not only from your gut feeling, but also using literature. So yeah, that's what we'll be doing. So I'll start with what I'm going to be doing now is tell you a little bit about each aspect. And I'm starting with the outcomes, and in the CMO Logic, that's at the end. But it doesn't matter where you start. You can start anywhere. You can start with the mechanisms, you can start with the intervention, and I start with the outcomes because I find this very intuitive. We all sort of know where we want to go to, because that's what the learning outcomes are. In the learning outcomes, what you do is you describe which aspects of your students' learning process you would like to understand better or improve. And these learning outcomes are, and then learning is all about changes in knowledge, skills, and attitudes of your students. So what do you want to change here? And you can, like the objectives of your course, that's one place to start if you have no idea, because that's what you want to do with the students in your course, or the learning outcomes. And it's good not to stop with the first thing that comes to mind. So Lindy, can you click for me to the next slide? So, for instance, you could say, I want my students to come to class prepared. And unfortunately, I couldn't, because of the system, I couldn't see your chat. So the things you were thinking about when Lindy asked you the question, what would you like to change or improve to your learning learning context you're involved in. But let's say you want your students to come to class prepared. You could write that down at the learning outcomes. However, it is good to think about the why do I want this question, if it's such a practical thing you see. So why do I want my students to come to class prepared? Well, because that leads to better quality discussions in class. Well, this is another outcome. And then we want to ask ourselves the why question again. Why do we want this? Well, because then they will have a better understanding of the crucial concepts. And why do I want this? Well, I want them to go into deep learning. I want them to learn these concepts. Well, now we have 4 instead of 1 learning outcomes, and they're all part of your educational context. It doesn't mean that you have to include them in all of them in your project, but what we're doing is we're trying to make conscious choices. So I can still choose to focus on students come to class prepared, but that's then something I chose deliberately. And I could also choose deep learning or a better understanding of the crucial concepts, or maybe a combination. So those are the learning outcomes. So what do we do with the learning intervention? In the learning intervention, what you do is you describe which teaching activities you want to use in order to achieve the desired learning outcomes that we just discussed, or which existing learning activities you would want to understand better. So it can be something that exists. It could be something that should be new implemented, or something that needs to be developed still. And it's all about what you're going to be changing about your learning environment, about your learning context. And that can be all kinds of things. We're changing things all the time. So I have a list here, Lindy, of things that you want to implement, or you implemented already, or a colleague implemented: peer feedback, a reflection paper, using voting tools, make use of a hybrid classroom or a flipped classroom. And I think if you wanted to make a list of all types of interventions you could do in your classroom, we would be sitting here tomorrow morning, because all around the world we're doing so many things and teachers are so creative that there are so many interventions to choose from. And this is very useful, and this is very nice, because it gives us all kinds of opportunities to reach our learning outcomes, that students come to class prepared, for instance. But it's also something that's difficult, because how do you know which intervention you should choose? Or how do you know that the intervention that you chose will work? Well, and here, in my opinion, you have to make a conscious choice that's not only based on your gut feeling, but also based on literature. And that's where the learning mechanisms become very important. And I'm going to give you an example of this. So here we have the intervention mechanisms and outcomes. And you see my students come to class prepared. That's the outcome I find very important. They gave peer feedback. So now I have gathered information on a conference, from colleagues, from a paper I read. 3 ways to do this. They're all about making my students come prepared to class. So I can provide them with a worked out example to provide peer feedback. Or I could reward my students for providing peer feedback, or I could regulate the process of providing peer feedback for the students. 3 ways, and which one should I choose? I can do this randomly, but then my time and the students' time are invested, and then what if I don't reach my outcomes? In my opinion, you should have a theoretical underpinning of which one to choose, because it hires the possibility that you're going to be reaching your results, your outcomes. So that's, if we go now to the learning mechanisms, yes, Lindy, yes, then you see that there are 3 learning mechanisms. You have the cognitive processes, or the cognitive mechanisms, the motivational mechanisms, or the regulatory mechanisms. And this is all what happens in the learner's head. That's why there's a black box there, because educational researchers also and teachers often see it as a black box. You put something in and something gets out. An intervention in, an outcome out. But something is happening there. And we want to know what is happening there. It's important to figure out what is happening there, because it gives you an idea of what is going on and which intervention you should choose. So to give you a quick overview of these mechanisms and what is meant by them, Lindy, the next slide. And you have to click a couple of times, because this has a... You see, the cognitive processes is what is happening in the head, in the students' heads. The processes that cause learning, your working memory, your long-term memory. It's all what's happening there when it comes to processing information. And if that happens in an effective and efficient way, then we learn. But you have to invest brain power. You have to want to invest this effort, and that's the motivation. Wanting to invest the effort, feeling motivated to do so. And another thing that's important for this learning process, or that it gets started, is that you know how to. What you can do to make this process effective and efficient and take control over this. And those are the regulatory processes. So I think there are more processes, but I think most of the projects that we do in SOTL projects are about one of these 3 processes or mechanisms, or a combination. So if we go back to the example, and you have to click a couple of times, yeah. Then if I study this, so I study why my students are not coming to class prepared, and I find out that it's because they have a cognitive problem. They find it very difficult to do. Then if I know that example A, provide a worked out example how to provide peer feedback, is the way to stimulate this, I know I have to choose A to get my learning outcomes. If I would choose B, reward students for providing feedback, which is a motivational, puts a motivational mechanism into motion, I won't reach my results. And for C, it's the same thing. It's a regulatory process that gets into motion, puts into motion there. And again, I won't reach my learning outcomes. So only by knowing why my students are not coming to class prepared, knowing which learning mechanism is behind this, I can choose an intervention that fits this mechanism. Okay, Lindy? So coming back to the learning mechanisms one more time, and that's with the light bulb, if you don't know the answer to these questions, so what should happen in the heads of my students, or what is at the core of the problem I'm trying to solve, you have to figure this out first. And it could be that your project from I want to solve this problem and see if it works, goes to I want to get more insight into my problem first before I choose an intervention. Okay, so how can you figure out these mechanisms? Well, you can talk to your students, you can talk to teachers. There are books and articles, knowledge knit, blogs, experts about these mechanisms. We have an example here, it's free, you can find it free on the internet, how learning works. But I think your students can give you a lot of information about this. So this is in very short, step 2. And I can imagine that it's still a kind of a little bit blurry because I had to rush through it. So again, my offer stands for you to ask for the booklet or get into contact with us. And so that's now we had step 1 and step 2, and then we go to step 3 and further. And the step 2 seems like a very intensive step, and it is. You have here 8 parts in this circle, but they don't reflect the time you invest. So step 2, invest a lot more time than step 1 and step 3, for instance. But all the information you gather there, all the conscious choices you make there, they pay you back in time as soon as you start formulating your researchable teaching question and design your research. It's the place where you, for instance, find what type of data you have to collect for you to answer your researchable teaching question. So now I would like to ask you, I think we're in a small enough group, although I'm afraid to look at the chat, so I'm asking Lindy or Irma. I think it's best if we don't go into small groups because we're such a small.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Yeah, so I would like to ask you, this is what when we work with teachers, we give them this for step 2. We give them a form in which they start thinking about their intervention, their learning mechanism, and their outcomes, and write down what they already know about this and what they don't know and still have to find out. Both questions are very important. You have to know what you already know, and you have to know what you don't know yet, because you can look for information then. So with the context you have put in the chat earlier on in this workshop, I would like you to look at this table or form, whatever, and start thinking about your intervention, your mechanism, and your learning outcomes, and what you already do know and what you don't know. And I'll give you about 10 minutes for this, and after that, we can discuss it. You can ask me questions for things you don't know. Maybe we can respond to each other. We'll just do it a little bit more plenary. So is this clear for everybody? If so, please raise your hand if it's clear. And Lindy will look for me if everybody raised their hand.
I don't, well, I see one hand raised, yeah.
Are there any questions? That's a good idea.
Maybe that's
Are there
also
any
good.
questions? If there are any questions about this, it would be good to put them in the chat or to put on your microphone.
Hi, I'm Andy Milson. I thought I would just turn my camera on and ask.
Very good idea. Very good idea.
Would you like us to try to work on all 6 of these portions of the form, or focus on a particular one?
What I would do is I would start. I would start with the one that you feel most comfortable with, and start writing down what you already know about this. So, for instance, the outcome, which outcomes you want, or maybe you already have an intervention, what the intervention is all about, and write down what you know and what you don't know. And then, if you think, well, I've written down something here, you can go to the next one.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Yeah, and you can find the form. Hopefully, below you can upload our presentation, the PDF, and there the form is also in.
Yeah, Lindy, I think you now. I don't see the presentation anymore.
I was sharing it, Femke, but
You were sharing. Okay.
I don't have 2 screens, so I couldn't see you anymore. So I thought I'd go back.
Because I think it's good to see the form.
Yeah, maybe you can share it again because you have 2 screens.
Okay, I'll try.
I'll share it, then you can still see everything. Can you see it, the PowerPoint, or not?
No.
Hmm.
You're trying to share your screen again? It might take a while. I mean, it worked last time.
Yeah, I'll try.
When the platform kicked you out, Femke, it worked in the end, and I managed to share her screen. So it might take a while. I don't know why it's so slow tonight, but hey, it's what it is.
You're on mute, Irma.
I chose the second sharing the app.
Yeah, it says it's sharing my screen, but
Shall I try?
yeah. If you come up with questions while thinking about this intervention mechanism or outcomes, please feel free to just ask them.
Wacht. Can you see now?
Yeah, it's showing at my end. I mean, I'm not sure this is what you want to share, but it's a table with 3 different columns.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So I see some things appearing in the chat. Great. Both about the intervention, so that's a good place to start, I guess. Femke, can you see the chat now or not?
No, if I do this, everything gets really slow, so you're not moving anymore.
Okay.
As soon as I start sharing. So my chat is also not responding.
So do you want to go through the comments posted in the chat, or do you want me to do that?
No, I think we
Okay.
I think we go plenary again because you all had some time to think about it, and we see some nice things appear on.
So my intervention.
I see some nice things appear in the chat. So maybe Andy, maybe you can explain what you wrote down and maybe give some comments on that.
Sure. So I teach a human geography class, and one of the topics we look at is the geography of hunger. So we look at food and agriculture and issues around famine. And we talk about the Sustainable Development Goals from the UN. And the second one of those is zero hunger. So we talk about the factors that are involved in hunger. And so I'm planning a service learning experience in the spring where students will plan a hunger banquet, which is an Oxfam approach to understanding sort of the unequal distribution of food and those kinds of things. And so I want to, I already know that, service learning and these kind of experiential learning methods can be incredibly valuable in shaping students' conceptual understanding. But I don't know exactly which aspects of this hunger banquet structure will be, most beneficial. So I plan a case study. I'm going to collect qualitative data and essentially look to see how do students reflect on the experience as they're planning it, as they're thinking about it, as they experience it, and then afterwards. And then how does that shape their understanding of the concept of global hunger and the geography of hunger. And so I guess, the intervention would be the service learning experience, the planning of the banquet and the hosting of the banquet. And then I was starting to type in my mechanism. So, I want to kind of think about their values and how those change over time. So I guess I'd be thinking about motivational factors, the cognitive processes that are both, sort of cognitive understandings, but also affective responses to this. So one of the prompts that I have in the reflective essays that I have them write is just sort of shorthand gut. So I asked them to sort of say, how are you feeling about the project to this point, the teamwork you're doing, your understanding and that sort of thing. So I want to kind of understand their, those sort of processes that go on and the values that they exhibit and how maybe those change as they experience this. So I hope I didn't talk too long, but that's essentially what I'm after.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing. I hear you already talking about data collection, and it's a really nice example, and I think you are really right about the mechanism. And already hear you talking about data collection and ways how to do it, and I think by investigating the real mechanism behind it, it will be more clear for you as well how to approach the data collection. So, but I think you already have some mechanisms clear. Do you feel that there's things that you need to find out more?
I guess I'd say that, you know, for mechanisms, this will be the first time I do this banquet, and so I don't know, and I need to find out, you know, is this an effective way of influencing students' understanding? Does it perhaps, you know, sort of reinforce some conceptual misunderstandings that I don't want to have, and that kind of thing. So I guess a lot of it is just, I haven't done this before. I want to try it out, see what happens. And so what I need to know is, does this really work? And in what ways does it, you know, not work in the broad scheme of a pedagogical intervention? And then I'll use the case study to kind of understand, you know, do I want to do this again for the following year? How do I want to, if I do, how do I want to shape that? So that's kind of, I guess, what I need to understand is modifying, what kinds of modifications and adjustments do I need to make to the process to accomplish the learning outcomes, you know, which would be those conceptual understandings in geography.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Considering the time, I would like to ask Carol. Carol, do you want to share what your thoughts are? You typed in a lot in.
Sure. Can you hear me? Is my audio okay?
Yeah.
Great. So just by way of context, I've just retired from my role as director of our teaching center at the University of Toronto. So the example I've given is one that I was supporting a range of instructors who had a range of issues in the use of newly designed active learning classroom spaces. And so a common issue was around, you know, I'll say the mechanism. So they're going to be using multiple screens in a large classroom with iPads connected to each of the small groups of 4. And it's an advanced room technology. And I think for many instructors, the questions were around, how do I use that technology in a seamless way, going back and forth? And how do I move from individual to small group to large group interaction to minimize the classroom management issues? So literally, even the physicality of teaching was altered in these classrooms, which oftentimes didn't have one focal front of the room. And then in terms of outcomes, it was often around, how do I measure an increased and effective interaction, instructor to student, student to student, when I have no baseline data in other words, I'm comparing it to a space I used to work in. So do I use that as the baseline, or do I compare my first experience in this physical space to my next experience? So I'm giving you sort of a number of issues that were oftentimes, my role was how to support those instructors, but also how could they engage in SOTL to help answer these questions.
Okay, thank you for sharing very much, Carol. Francis, do you want to share? Do you have some thoughts, maybe?
Yes, I really want to know, what are we looking for in the mechanism? So for my intervention, we started an undergraduate learning assistant program to enhance students' learning, right? They support the instructors right in the class to model learning. So we did a pilot, we piloted and we did an evaluation. So we found, yes, they do support students learning, but then how? We're not so sure. Yeah, we don't know how, because if we do know how, then we can actually intentionally place them so that, you know, like instructors can maximize the undergraduate learning assistant. So when I walk through the chats you have, when I get to the mechanism, what is this about? What do you really want us to be thinking about here? Because I can go straight to my research question, you know, but you're asking me to pause and think of something here. What do you want me to think about here?
Well, it's the reason why we added this CMO step, this step 2, was that we found that a lot of teachers who are getting engaged in SOTL find it very hard to formulate a research question immediately. And they also find it very hard, once they get a kind of clue about a question, to formulate or to find literature. Very often they want to show this. What we want to achieve is looking at this outcome and this mechanisms and this intervention, is that the teachers, that the person who getting engaged in SOTL are much more thinking about what is it really that I want to change with my students, what is really happening with my students. And if I'm, for example, if I'm going to use techniques in my classroom, what will it do with my students? Do we already know from literature? Do we already know from other experiences with a certain technique what it does with students, what problem it will solve? So with the mechanisms, we really want to help the teachers to focus, the people who are getting engaged in SOTL, help to focus more on what is really happening with student learning before they immediately start formulating the research questions. So I hope that maybe Femco, Lindy, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, so my thoughts hearing your question is that the question you still have, like, okay, we had this learning assistant program and it seems to work, but why does it work? That's exactly, this why question is exactly the mechanism that we're talking about. So it's about the bridge between your intervention and your outcomes. And this mechanism is going to help you, thinking about this mechanism is going to help you to find out, like, okay, was it that they were more motivated, which made this intervention work, or was it that they understood the concepts that were going on better, which made this program work, or did it help them regulate the learning? So the question you had, I think, is exactly what we mean with the mechanism.
Yeah, this.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, makes sense.
A question for you, because I'm really sorry, but considering the time, we don't have time to go into everything you wrote down. But did you all, what did you feel about working like this? What did you feel about thinking about the things you want to do in the SOTL project in such a way, like in the CMO way? Maybe one of you can. Somebody wants to say something about it. Andy, yeah.
I'll just jump in and say I like the structure quite a bit. I think it's really helpful to step back and kind of force yourself to go through the process of thinking about. I really like the what do I know and what do I need to know. I think that really helps to sort of sort out where the question really is, not just to affirm something I already know, but to say I need, this is what I need to know, and perhaps then that again connects to the data collection that you need to engage in. So I like the structure a lot. I'm running an FLC this year, and we're working through this book, which you're probably familiar with. And doing the worksheets and that sort of thing. And I think it's we're all faculty members who understand research, and I like the fact that the book sort of approaches us in that direction. It's we know that you know how to do research, but here's how SOTL is a little different, or here's how you apply what you already know to the SOTL process. And I think this structure also, I'll share this with my group. Thanks for the download. I downloaded the slides, so I think your structure to me is very helpful. So thank you.
Okay. To finish off, but at the moment in Utrecht, we use it quite a lot. We use it, for example, in several courses, and we use it for teachers who want to get engaged in SOTL, but also for teachers who want a basic teaching qualification. So we use it quite a lot, and we experience that our teachers who use it have a better feeling of how they have to formulate a research question, and they also are formulating more focused research questions than they did before they used this roadmap. So it really helps them. So, and if you, Andy already said, you can download it. You can download the slides, but you can also download the roadmap. I will share, or Femke or me will share to end this session the way you can find the roadmap, but I also put it down in the blue button as an attachment, so you can also download the roadmap. And as Femke and Lindy already said, you can always contact us if you want more information or if you want printed copies. We already showed it, so last time. If you want this really nice printed copies, you just send us an email and we send you some printed copies of the roadmap if you want. So I think on behalf of Lindy and Femke, I would like to thank you that you participated in this workshop. And if there are any last questions, feel free to ask, and otherwise don't hesitate to contact us if you want to know more or if you want us to present something.
I just put the PDF, the English PDF of the roadmap in the chat.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I downloaded that too. I posted a question in the chat. I don't know if you saw it, but I'm wondering if there's any chance that you guys might host ISSOTL in the future. I
would like to, yeah.
I'd love to come there.
Yeah, maybe we start with the ISSOTL first, but ISSOTL would also be great. Yeah, I would love to. Yeah. But it's, it's something I will try to achieve within a couple of years. Yeah.
That'd be great.
Where are you based, Andy? Where are you?
I'm in the Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas area in the United States. So I'm at the University of Texas at Arlington.
Oh, yeah. So Utrecht is a really nice place to come to. So
yes, yeah. I've never been to the Netherlands, so believe it or not. So lots of other places in Europe, but that's a place I want to go sometime very soon.
So yeah, but maybe you can put something forward. That's something. The more people say, well, we should go to the Netherlands, the better.
Right.
Yeah, I would love to. That's something I would really like to achieve, that we can do that, or maybe the ISSOTL or the ISSOTL. That would be great.
Is ISSOTL a nice conference too? I haven't been to that.
Yeah, it's the smaller version of the ISSOTL with all European countries. Mm-hmm. Which doesn't mean that people from the United States are not welcome, but it's mainly the people from the European countries.
Yeah. Okay. Well, hopefully COVID will leave us alone and we'll be able to start doing international travel again, because I miss it desperately.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we can meet physically in Utrecht within a couple of years.
That'd be fantastic.
Otherwise,
it's nice to meet all of you and hear about your work. I appreciate it very much.
Okay.
Thanks for attending.
Okay.
Thank you all. Carol here from Toronto. I really enjoyed your session and appreciated all of the sharing that you did. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for attending. Yeah.
Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.